For over 3,000 years, the Keth Mori had been the galaxy's ultimate nightmare. Picture this. 12-foot-tall crystalline monsters with 6 razor-sharp arms fly around in ships that looked like they were designed by death itself. These things had conquered 47 star systems. And here's the twisted part. They literally fed on fear. Not kidding. They needed the terror of their victims to survive, like some cosmic horror story come to life. Imagine waking up one morning and seeing these creatures floating above your city. Your first instinct would be to run, right? Well, that's exactly what every other species in the galaxy had done for thousands of years. The moment these crystal nightmares showed up, entire civilizations would just give up. No fight, no resistance, just complete surrender. And honestly, who could blame them? Think about it this way. You're facing an enemy that's twice your size, has 6 arms instead of 2, and their weapons are so advanced that your best military technology looks like a kid's toy in comparison. But here's the really messed up part. They don't just want to kill you or take your resources. They want you alive and terrified because that's literally how they eat. They absorb the chemical reactions your body creates when you're scared out of your mind. Every conquered world became like a giant fear farm. The Keth Mori would keep populations just scared enough to produce the terror they needed, but not so terrified that people would die from fright. It was a perfectly calculated system of psychological torture that had worked for millennia across dozens of different alien species. The Keth Mori had this whole process down to a science. They'd arrive in a star system with their massive fleet of ships that looked like flying cathedrals made of black crystal. These weren't just vehicles. They were works of art designed specifically to inspire dread. Every angle, every surface, every detail was crafted to make you feel small and helpless just by looking at them. Their approach was always the same. First, they positioned their ships in perfect formation above the most populated planets. Then they broadcast a message in whatever language the local species used. The message was simple. Surrender completely, and your suffering will be manageable. Resist, and we'll make sure your terror feeds us for generations. Most species lasted maybe a few hours before their leaders were practically fighting each other to be the first to surrender. The Zephyrians gave up in 20 minutes. The proud warrior race called it the Rakians. The ones with all the honor codes and battle traditions. They folded in under an hour. Even the highly advanced Cerebrals, who were basically living computers, took one look at the Keth Mori fleet and decided that mathematical probability favored immediate surrender. For 3,000 years, this pattern never changed. The Keth Mori would show up, species would surrender, and another world would become part of their growing empire of fear. They'd gotten so good at this that they started taking bets on how long each new species will hold out. The record was held by some stubborn rock people who lasted almost 6 hours before giving up. But then came 2387, and everything changed. The Keth Mori scouts had detected this little blue planet orbiting a yellow star in what the locals called the Sol System. The inhabitants were these weird bipedal creatures who walked upright on just 2 legs. Pretty unusual in the galaxy. Actually, most intelligent species had at least 4 limbs, often more. These humans, as they called themselves, had only recently figured out faster-than-light travel. Their ships were crude, boxy things that looked like flying metal crates compared to the elegant death art of Keth Mori vessels. Their weapons were primitive projectile systems and basic energy beams. By galactic standards, they were basically cavemen who just discovered fire. The Keth Mori leadership was actually a bit disappointed. This looked like it was going to be even easier than usual. Some of the younger Keth Mori warriors complained that it wouldn't even be good practice. Admiral Zethkar, one of their most experienced commanders, decided this conquest was so simple that he'd handle it personally as a quick training exercise for his newest officers. Little did they know that this small blue world was about to teach the galaxy's most feared predators what it really meant to be afraid. Admiral Zethkar, yeah, that's actually his name, decided this conquest was so simple he only needed 12 ships. 12 for an entire planet. Think about that for a second. This guy had conquered dozens of worlds with fleets of hundreds of ships, and he looked at Earth and thought, nah, 12 should do it. The level of confidence here was absolutely insane. He was so sure this would be easy that he decided to come personally to watch the show, probably planning to use it as a training video for new recruits. And honestly, at first, everything went exactly according to plan. The Keth Mori ships appeared in Earth's orbit on a Tuesday morning, and within hours, our most advanced military installations were nothing but puddles of melted glass. The Pentagon, NORAD military bases across Europe and Asia, gone in minutes. Their weapons were so far beyond anything we had that our best fighter jets might as well have been paper airplanes. Our radio frequencies filled up with desperate transmissions from world leaders begging for mercy. The president was on every channel trying to negotiate. The UN called emergency sessions. Panic spread through major cities faster than wildfire as people watched the news footage of our military getting absolutely demolished. Traffic jams stretched for miles as people tried to evacuate, even though there was really nowhere to run from an enemy that controlled orbital space. Admiral Zethkar was probably sitting in his command chair, watching all this unfold, thinking, right on schedule, give a few more hours and they'll be surrendering just like everyone else. He'd seen this exact same pattern play out across 47 different worlds. The initial shock, the desperate attempt at negotiation, the spreading panic. It was all textbook. But then something weird started happening that the Keth Mori had never witnessed before in 3,000 years of conquest. See, every other species in the galaxy would collapse into complete terror at this point. They'd be so paralyzed by fear that organized resistance would become impossible. Governments would fall apart, military chains of command would break down, and within days, sometimes hours, someone would be waving a white flag. Humans? We did something completely different, something the Keth Mori had never seen before in their entire history of galactic domination. We regrouped. We adapted. We got back up and started fighting even harder than before. It started small. Individual soldiers who'd been cut off from their units began forming makeshift squads with whoever they could find. Other military personnel, police officers, even armed civilians. Instead of running away or hiding, they started studying Keth Mori patrol patterns and looking for weaknesses. Communication networks that should have collapsed under panic instead became coordination channels for resistance cells. The first real shock came during the Battle of Detroit. The city was supposed to be a simple occupation zone, but the Keth Mori ground forces found themselves facing something they'd never encountered before. A regular Army sergeant named Billy Thompson had somehow managed to organize the remaining National Guard units with local police and even some citizen militias. Instead of cowering in bunkers, they were setting up ambushes and hit-and-run attacks. But the moment that really changed everything happened 3 days into the invasion. A guy named Tommy Jenkins, just a regular infantry soldier from Detroit, not some special forces superhero, had been separated from his unit when their base got hit. He was bleeding from shrapnel wounds on his arm, leg, and side, barely able to walk, completely outgunned and outnumbered. Any rational person would have found somewhere to hide and wait for medical help. Any other species in the galaxy would have been paralyzed with terror. But Tommy did something that broke every pattern the Keth Mori understood about conquest psychology. He studied the enemy patrol routes, figured out where their local command post was, and decided to pay them a visit. This injured human somehow infiltrated a heavily guarded Keth Mori position, while carrying enough homemade explosives to level a city block. When he finally stood face-to-face with 3 of their field commanders, they expected him to beg for mercy or at least show some sign of the fear they needed to sustain themselves. Instead, Tommy looked at these 12-foot crystalline nightmares, smiled like he was about to tell a joke, said Detroit versus everybody, and detonated his entire explosive pack. The blast took out not just the 3 commanders, but also damaged their primary communication relay for that sector. Admiral Zethkar received the report an hour later and stared at it for several minutes, completely confused. This wasn't how conquest worked. This wasn't how any species had ever behaved. What kind of creature sacrifices itself not out of desperation, but out of defiance? That's when the Keth Mori realized they had a serious problem on their hands. Reports started flooding in from every single front, and none of them made any sense, according to 3,000 years of conquest experience. This wasn't following the pattern at all. In Chicago, a woman named Lisa Rodriguez was supposed to be cowering in her apartment building like a good little victim. Instead, she spent 2 days turning the entire structure into one massive trap. When Keth Mori forces tried to set up a forward command post in the building, they found that Lisa had somehow managed to rig every floor with homemade explosives connected to her grandmother's old radio. She sat in the basement, waited for the building to fill up with alien troops, then calmly turned the dial to her favorite oldie station. The whole building came down, taking out an entire Keth Mori tactical unit. The thing that really confused the aliens was that Lisa could have easily escaped. She had plenty of time to run, but instead, she chose to stay behind and make sure her building would never serve as an enemy base. She left a note that just said, "This is my home. Find your own." Captain Mike O'Brien's story was even more baffling to the Keth Mori command structure. His F-16 fighter had taken heavy damage during patrol over the Atlantic, and any sensible pilot would have ejected over friendly territory. His engines were failing, his weapon systems were dead, and he was losing fuel fast. But instead of bailing out, Mike spotted a Keth Mori cruiser hovering over New York Harbor. Now, understand that ramming attacks weren't completely unknown in galactic warfare, but they usually happen when pilots were trapped with no other options. Mike had options. He could have ejected safely, but he looked at that alien ship threatening his city, made a choice, and flew his crippled fighter straight into the cruiser's bridge at maximum speed. The impact didn't destroy the ship, but it killed the entire command crew and left the cruiser drifting helplessly until other human forces could finish it off. The Patterson family story really drove the point home for Admiral Zethkar. The Pattersons ran a cattle ranch in rural Montana, just regular folks trying to make a living. When Keth Mori scouts identified their property as ideal for a supply depot, the family was given a standard ultimatum: evacuate immediately or be relocated to a containment facility. Most species would have packed up and left, grateful to still be alive. The Pattersons looked around at their land, 5 generations of family history, cattle their great-grandfather had started raising, a house built by their own hands, and decided that if they couldn't have it, nobody could. They spent their last night setting charges throughout every building, every piece of equipment, even the grain silos. When the Keth Mori arrived the next morning, they found nothing but craters and a sign that read, "Patterson Ranch, established 1892, closed 2387. Thanks for nothing." These weren't military tactics the Keth Mori understood at all. It was a fear they desperately needed to survive. Every other species had provided a steady stream of terror that kept their forces fed and energized. But humans were doing something completely different, something aliens had never encountered in their entire history of galactic domination. Instead of terror, humans were showing pure spite. Not just anger or defiance, spite. That uniquely human emotion that says, if I'm going down, I'm taking you with me, and I'm going to make sure you regret ever meeting me. It was like giving the entire universe the middle finger, while everything burned down around you. We weren't just refusing to be afraid. We were making our deaths as expensive as possible for them. Every single human they eliminated cost them resources, time, equipment, and often their own personnel. It was like trying to eat a meal that fought back from inside your stomach, except worse, because the meal was also rigged with explosives. The Keth Mori had built their entire empire on fear, but humans were serving up something completely different. We were weaponizing our own stubbornness. Every farm that got blown up instead of captured, every building that became a trap instead of a base, every suicide attack that took out alien equipment. It all added up to a logistics nightmare that no Keth Mori commander had ever had to deal with. Admiral Zethkar started getting reports from his field commanders that were basically just lists of complaints. The humans won't stop fighting even when they're clearly beaten. They keep destroying their own infrastructure rather than let us use it. Every position we take costs us more than it's worth. Where's the fear? We're starving out here. For the first time in 3 millennia, the galaxy's ultimate predators were learning what it felt like to be frustrated. Admiral Zethkar made the single biggest mistake in his species' 3,000-year history. He was getting increasingly frustrated with these stubborn humans who refused to follow the normal pattern of conquest. Every other species had broken within days. But here we were weeks into the invasion, still fighting back harder than ever. His commanders were complaining about supply shortages. His troops weren't getting the fear-based nutrition they needed, and worst of all, He was starting to look incompetent in front of the Kethmori High Command. So he decided to do what had always worked before, escalate the brutality until the enemy finally broke. He looked at his tactical displays and identified the perfect target for a demonstration that would surely crush human resistance once and for all. Luna Colony, humanity's first permanent settlement beyond Earth, home to 300,000 civilians. It was far enough from Earth to be defenseless, but visible enough that every human on the planet could watch what happened to those who defied the Kethmori. The attack itself was methodical and complete. Zethkar didn't just want to destroy the colony. He wanted to erase it so thoroughly that nothing would remain but empty space and a lesson that would last forever. His flagship's main cannon charged for several minutes, building up enough energy to crack a small moon. The beam that finally lanced out was beautiful in its terrible precision, a column of pure destruction that turned Luna Colony and a significant chunk of the moon's surface into superheated plasma in less than 10 seconds. 300,000 people, engineers, scientists, teachers, families who had volunteered to help humanity expand into space. Gone in an instant. Mothers, fathers, children who had never known war, who had dedicated their lives to building something better for the human race. The footage was crystal clear from every angle as Kethmori drones broadcasted destruction to every human communication network on Earth and throughout the solar system. Zethkar's message was simple and had worked on 47 other worlds. This is what happens when you resist the Kethmori. Surrender now, and your suffering will be minimized. Continue fighting, and every human settlement will share Luna Colony's fate. He sat back in his command chair, confident that within hours he'd be receiving surrender transmissions from every human leader on Earth. But something unprecedented happened instead. For 72 hours, human space went completely and utterly silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from fear or shock. This was different, more ominous. No surrender offers came through. No desperate transmissions begging for mercy. No panic communications between human military units. Even the normal civilian radio chatter just stopped. The only thing broadcasting across every human frequency was a simple message that repeated endlessly. Remember Luna? Just those 2 words, over and over, in every language humans spoke. Remember Luna? It became like a heartbeat across human space, steady and relentless, and somehow more terrifying than any threat could have been. Admiral Zethkar started getting nervous reports from his scouts. Human military units weren't falling apart like they should have. Instead, they were consolidating, regrouping, and doing something that made no tactical sense. They were abandoning all defensive positions. Ships that had been protecting Earth were leaving their posts. Space stations were being evacuated. It looked like humans were either preparing to run away completely or something else. Then Bill Harrison changed everything. This guy wasn't even supposed to be in command of anything. He was a maintenance worker on one of Earth's orbital shipyards, the kind of person who fixed broken air recyclers and welded hull plates. But when the actual admiral started making plans to evacuate what was left of humanity, Bill stood up in a meeting and said something that shifted the entire war. "We're not running," he announced to a room full of senior officers. "And we're not hiding. Every human ship in this solar system is going to hunt down every single Kethmori vessel, and we're going to make them pay for Luna." Somehow, this maintenance worker who'd never commanded anything bigger than a repair crew became the voice that every surviving human fleet captain wanted to follow. What happened next broke every rule of space warfare that the Kethmori understood. Human ships stopped defending fixed positions and started hunting. But this wasn't normal hit-and-run tactics or guerrilla warfare. Every engagement became a trap, where humans would sacrifice themselves specifically to take out Kethmori vessels. They weren't trying to win in any conventional sense. They were weaponizing their own deaths. Human captains would ram their ships into Kethmori cruisers. Pilots would wait until enemy fighters were in formation, then detonate their own fuel tanks to take out entire squadrons. It was like fighting an enemy that had decided death was just another weapon in their arsenal. The final assault on the Kethmori homeworld wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was something far more terrifying. It was a systematic extermination carried out by a species that had moved beyond anger, beyond revenge, beyond even hatred. The humans who arrived at the crystal spires of Kethmore Prime weren't interested in conquest, negotiation, or even their own survival. They had one simple goal: make sure that every single Kethmori in the universe stopped breathing. By the time human fleets reached the enemy homeworld, something fundamental had changed about our species. The laughing maintenance worker Bill Harrison was gone, replaced by a cold-eyed strategist who spoke in clipped, efficient sentences. The scattered resistance fighters from Earth had become something else entirely, a unified force that moved with machine-like precision toward a single objective. Captain Jessica Williams exemplified this transformation. Before the war, she'd been a cargo hauler, moving supplies between mining stations. Nothing special, just another working-class pilot trying to make a living in space. But Luna Colony had changed her, just like it changed all of us. When she volunteered to lead the first boarding parties against Kethmori capital ships, nobody questioned her qualifications. There was something in her eyes that said she was exactly the right person for the job. Jessica and her teams moved through alien vessels like death itself had learned to walk upright. They didn't waste time with tactics or strategy. They just moved from compartment to compartment, systematically eliminating every Kethmori they encountered. No prisoners were taken. No mercy was shown. No hesitation slowed them down. When Kethmori defenders tried to surrender, the humans simply continued their advance as if nothing had been said. What made this so terrifying for the Kethmori wasn't the efficiency of the human assault. They'd seen efficient killing before. It was a complete absence of fear. For 3,000 years, the Kethmori had fed on the terror of their enemies. It sustained them, energized them, made them stronger. But these humans generated no fear at all. They were like walking voids, empty spaces where terror should have existed. The Kethmori homeworld had been designed as the ultimate fortress, with crystalline cities that could withstand planetary bombardment and defensive systems that had never been tested because no enemy had ever made it that far. But human forces didn't try to break through those defenses. They just accepted whatever casualties were necessary and kept moving forward, like a tide that couldn't be stopped or reasoned with. Admiral Zethkar found himself trapped in his command citadel, watching his civilization die in real time through surveillance feeds from across the planet. Every report was the same. Human forces advancing steadily, Kethmori defenses falling not through clever tactics, but through sheer relentless pressure. His own troops were sending him messages he'd never received before, requests to retreat, to evacuate, to run away. For the first time in his species' history, Kethmori soldiers were experiencing genuine terror. Not the calculated fear they induced in others, but raw, primal panic at facing an enemy that couldn't be deterred, negotiated with, or understood. They were finally learning what every other species in the galaxy had felt when crystalline ships appeared in their skies. As human forces closed in on his position, Zethkar managed to send one final transmission to the scattered remnants of his empire. His voice shook as he spoke. Another first for a species that had never known fear. Emergency directive to all Kethmori forces. Do not engage the humans. Retreat from their space immediately. These creatures are not conquerors seeking territory. They are not even warriors fighting for victory. They are something far worse. He paused, watching through his monitors as Captain Jessica Williams and her team breached the Citadel's outer defenses. They are a species that chooses extinction over submission. They would rather die than kneel, and they will kill every single one of us before they accept defeat. We created monsters when we destroyed their moon colony. Run and never look back. That transmission became legendary across the galaxy. Within months, word spread to every spacefaring civilization about what had happened to the mighty Kethmori Empire. The species that had dominated 47 star systems for 3 millennia had been completely eliminated by primitive humans who'd barely mastered faster-than-light travel. Dozens of aggressive alien species quietly pulled their ships back from the borders of human space. The Thrakian warrior clans, who'd been planning their own invasion of Earth, suddenly discovered urgent business on the far side of the galaxy. The Cerebrals ran probability calculations and decided that any species capable of wiping out the Kethmori was mathematically too dangerous to provoke. Humanity had taught the galaxy a lesson that would be remembered for generations. There are some species you just don't mess with, not because they're the strongest or most advanced, but because they're absolutely crazy enough to burn down the entire universe rather than accept defeat.